Today, you are going to hear from the first Labour Party candidate for the Senedd election on this podcast. Now, there is at least one further interview all lined up, but hopefully there will be another two, making it three in total. But anyway, today you're going to hear from Calum Higgins, who is standing in Sir Gaerfyrddin. I think I've pronounced that wrong, but you will hear Calum Higgins say it himself, and obviously he's pronouncing it correctly, as he is also a Welsh speaker. I'm not. I really wish I was. I think the Labour candidates undoubtedly have a really difficult job when it comes to doing these interviews and any other of the media that they are doing, because of course they are the incumbent government and are essentially defending their record while also trying to establish themselves moving forward. And again, that is enough of an introduction. I'm sure you'll enjoy this episode. Calum has a lot of insightful things to say, and he's also had a really interesting career that I think is in itself worth listening to. So let's get straight into it. Welcome to Wales in Context, the podcast exploring the stories shaping modern Wales. Each episode, we take a closer look at the politics, policies, and decisions that affect people across the country, breaking down complex issues and placing them in the wider Welsh and global context. From the Senedd to communities on the ground, we speak to the people who know the issues best. I'm your host, Keisha Page, and this is Wales in Context.
It's that bit of the campaign where everyone's in automatic, just knocking doors sort of every hour you can, and it's been sunny, which is nice, makes it a bit more cheery. It's difficult when it rains and everyone feels a bit miserable, but actually in the sun it is obviously a bit more fun, and I've caught the sun. I think you can probably see my forehead. I forgot to put sun cream on one of the days this weekend and it caught me. So
do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Well, I'm Calum Higgins. I am the lead candidate in Sir Gaerfyrddin for Welsh Labour. I've been a community councillor for over a decade, a county councillor in the past, and my background is in the third sector as a lawyer for Citizens Advice, and now as a policy manager for a trade union in the NHS in Wales. So I've got sort of experience outside of politics, mainly in representing workers and people affected by austerity in the last decade or so.
I was going to say, actually, it sounds like you've had like such a varied career, but actually that's the one thing that joins them all, isn't it? I suppose that you're representing people.
I've always had, I've either represented people individually as a lawyer, and working on the devolved legal side of Citizens Advice's advice to people, particularly in that difficult period around austerity and benefits changes, introduction of universal credit, and then moving into the trade union sector. There's a more defined membership of people that are working in the NHS in particular, but also there's a private membership there as well who work in private practice, and it's been interesting representing that broad section of people, but who the common thing was they've been affected by cuts and changes to the way that work is delivered, technology, AI, and also then the pandemic and how we all dealt with that. So helping them, representing them to the government, and then also helping the government get information out to them, which is a really interesting dynamic during that period.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that the Welsh government gets a lot of criticism in that regard for not taking the public along with them. I think the 20 mile an hour being one really good example of that, where I don't know how effectively that was communicated to the public in terms of why it was done and the kind of safety element to it. Do you think that's something that you can bring to the Senedd, perhaps, is being able to communicate better with people outside?
Yeah, I think I've learned about co-producing policy and having people who are affected by it in the room when you're designing things and discussing policy. I'd say the issue with 20 mile an hour, as an example, was that, and this is one criticism you could make of the Welsh government, is that it let local government really lead on how it's delivered locally, which in one way is a good thing because you're reacting to local needs and elements. But that meant there was variation across Wales. That meant that in certain areas, I can point to certain roads in my own area, which the council probably got wrong. But Welsh government got the blame for it because the communication around that maybe wasn't great. And it's that was really that's what's caused the angst around those issues. And if you look at where there's criticism of Welsh government, sometimes they haven't explained what they're trying to do or taken the public's sort of message, the messaging from the public back and reacted to it instantly. It's been more of a a slow process to react to criticism rather than adapt and get in front of it. And that is often, I think, because we delegate a lot from the centre and Welsh government, and we delegate to local government, delegate to health boards. And that's when you see the void in information sometimes, where Welsh government really could have taken a stronger lead.
So why now then? Why is it you're standing for the Senedd this time around?
Yeah, so I've stood before for Parliament in 2015, and it was a target seat for the Labour Party, and we lost, but that was the year, Ed Miliband did not become Prime Minister. So I was one of those seats that needed a turn really for him to be Prime Minister, and it just didn't go our way. And so I've always had the ambition of standing. I then decided to take a bit of a break and go get experience outside of politics, and we've gone through that. But this now, with the expansion of the Senedd and lots of incumbents standing down, was an opportunity when my local seat was really up for grabs. There was no incumbent restanding, and I thought, looking at the way that Welsh Government now delivers services, it's becoming the thing that people concentrate on, the basics, bread and butter of services, health, education, local government, and the resources we give to local government being the thing that comes up most on the doors. It's those services that really people have seen the difference in over the years. And I just thought, if I really want to have impact and change things, the Welsh Senedd and Welsh government is where things are probably at in people's day-to-day lives. And I've always been Welsh Labour focused. I've always been pro devolution. So I thought, yeah, actually, I should go for it. After discussion with local members who told me, yeah, maybe it's your time to stand again, Callum.
That's really interesting. I think that brings us on perfectly to the fact that there's so many incumbent candidates and high profile
Yeah,
candidates as well
yeah,
stepping
yeah.
down at this election. Do you think that offers an exciting opportunity for people like yourself, obviously potentially going to be in the Senedd, but also for the party as well, because it does give that chance to kind of not start over, but perhaps build on what the previous governments have done and potentially move the party in a slightly different direction, maybe be bolder in thinking and things like that. So do you think that's an interesting opportunity?
Yeah, I think we've got big names standing down, people who've really had an impact on the future of Wales and have taken that devolution through, what Alina's calling those chapters of the early chapters of devolution, establishing the Senedd and then defending it against austerity and making decisions differently in Wales. Now is that time for looking forward in the future, and there are loads of younger candidates. I'm not sure how young I am in that. I'm 37 now, but I'm still, I think, comparatively young for a politician, and so are a lot of the other candidates. They're in those sort of that age bracket. Really had a little bit of experience outside of politics, but young and enthusiastic, and really want to change things for the better. It's just fresh thinking, and when people have been in somewhere a long time, in any job, you need new people to come in and refresh the way any organization thinks. But there's a double-edged sword to that. We're losing lots of experience, and we need to make sure that we don't lose that completely. People have learnt, through the pandemic and through austerity about how to run a government, and that's something which the other parties haven't got, is that experience. So we don't want to throw that out. That's something we need to keep, and we need to acknowledge that actually experience and longevity is a good thing in balance with a fresh group of the next generation of Senedd members and candidates for Labour coming through.
That's interesting. You said about the kind of how your age and how you are clearly on the younger end of the age bracket. I actually interviewed Luke Fletcher and Kira Marshall
Mm,
late last week. Kira being only 28, she was 28 a couple of days ago, and Luke actually being the youngest Senedd member in the last Senedd
mm,
bracket. But we were saying how interesting it is that this time around it feels as if there's younger candidates standing for nearly all parties,
yeah,
including parties that we may not expect, Reform,
yeah,
Conservatives, they've got young candidates as well. How important do you think that is to the makeup of the Senedd to have those younger candidates now coming through,
yeah.
potentially across the spectrum as well?
Yeah, well, I think that's actually come from the expansion of the Senedd, because even if you didn't expand the Senedd, right, there'd be lots of incumbents from sitting parties who are restanding, and there wouldn't be those gaps for younger people to put their name in for selection. So actually, that's a benefit of the expansion of the Senedd. There was 36 vacancies effectively, and I think all parties have managed to then find younger candidates and a more diverse slate of candidates. Um, I think it's really important. So I think there's a balance to be had. I think young people need representation in our Senedd, in Parliament in Westminster, and in local government. I was the youngest councillor in Carmarthenshire when I got elected in 2012. It was a very lonely place to be young, like, and people were very friendly. But all councillors were generally retired. I think there were three working councillors when I was there, and one of them was Kevin Campbell, who applied. And I remember discussing with him at the time how many people were actually working as councillors at the same time, and most of them, out of the 74 odd councillors in Carmarthenshire, 70 of them were retired. So I think that's a shocking statistic, really, when you think about how do people then represent the people that they're meant to in the communities they're serving, when they maybe don't understand what it's like right now to be of working age, trying to meet the cost of living, work the hours you are, childcare, all those issues. Younger people have a different experience, so it is really, really important that we get that voice in there. And I think it'll maybe have an effect on policy around housing, education in particular, and those sort of things, which maybe don't get the attention they deserve when you have a slightly older representation in the Senedd.
So we can't avoid the question of what has gone wrong for Labour. Well, I think we do the negative and then the positives of
Yeah.
what Labour may have, what you think are the kind of wins for Labour. So what do you think has gone wrong for Labour? Looking at the polls, obviously we don't know what's going to happen. Anything can happen, we all know that. But based on
Yeah.
the polls, what do you think has gone wrong?
So I think it goes back to 2024, and the alarm bells should have rung then. There was a bit of a shock in the reform vote. I think how close they came in some seats, and we ran on a ticket of change for Westminster, but change in the Senedd is not the message we can run with, because we aren't. Change would mean not Welsh Labour, unless Welsh Labour refreshes and puts forward the next chapter, which Elined has put forward in our manifesto. And I think getting our message out there has been incredibly difficult. That you can keep Welsh Labour, acknowledging the challenges we've had over the last decade, and austerity, pandemic, Brexit. And we set up the Senedd. It's a positive thing that we've done. But people are looking at incumbent governments everywhere and going, I want change. We benefit from that in Westminster, and we really pushed that message hard in the election. And I think we're struggling now to change that, because people still want change and they're frustrated. But I think we're putting forward a manifesto that says we're looking to the future. We now can do the things that we wanted to do because we've got a government we can work in partnership with. And also, when we're out of austerity, that was the big thing that was holding everything back. When someone asks me, well, why didn't you do that when you were in power? Well, it's because we didn't have the money. We were making choices between social care, education, and health every day. And I was a councillor in local government at the time, as I've said, and we were having to make choices between about which daycare centre got closed, or library, or which school we didn't build because of austerity. Those things have now caught up, and people are frustrated. And it's going to take time for the UK government to be able to pump that money through. We've had one budget where we've had a big boost for the devolved budget for Wales, and the block grant. But we have to have some patience around how long that's going to take to actually feed through into change on the ground and people feeling it in terms of their public services and improvement. So that's the challenge. I wouldn't say it's gone wrong as such. I just say that we need to recognise that it is harder to turn things around as quickly as people expect. And when you run on a ticket for change, people are going to get frustrated that it hasn't happened, right away.
I think for us in the political kind of sphere, we are able to kind of differentiate the difference between governments and leaders of parties. So,
Yeah.
the difference between Mark Drakeford and Eleanor Morgan. But how do we communicate that to the public then? Particularly, how do the Labour Party communicate that there are differences between leaders, even though it is a consistency of Labour government? How do we communicate that actually it's not all the same?
I think it has improved a great deal. The pandemic became that point, I think, where people realised that Welsh Government ran the health service. And then because obviously we've had, in my opinion, it's because we've had austerity and we've had the cuts to public funding, that we've ended up in the position where the NHS has had these long waiting lists. The buildings haven't had the investment they should have. That the infrastructure isn't there. That comes from a decade of underinvestment. People are now going, well, you run the health service, and we're having to explain, well, actually, our funding mainly comes from Westminster. So that's quite complicated for people to understand. The average person on the door sometimes doesn't quite understand the intricacies of devolution, but a lot of the time, they are aware that now there's a Welsh government and that they run the key services. So there's some work around educating the public in general, young people. There's an opportunity to talk to them just about who runs what and who's responsible for what, rather than getting into the party politics of it. Because I just think we need people to understand what different levels of government do. Because quite often, the other end of the spectrum, I quite often get the blame when I'm on the door for something that the local Plaid Cymru County Council have done, because people think that's Welsh government that have done it. Potholes or a school not being built. It's very often a council issue, and actually, like, again, there's education to be done around that. That there are levels of government, different levels responsible for different things. I'm not sure anyone's ever been particularly clear about who does what. They run, they vote on feeling. Generally, the public, they vote on, if things are feeling good, they vote for the party that's incumbent. If things are feeling not so good, they look for change. Um, and differentiating which level of government's responsible for that is maybe very little return on that in the end. I think maybe you need to have that message of hope and say that, we will change things, stick with us, rather than getting into the intricacies of who's to blame for anything.
Yeah, that's really important. I think two questions off the back of that, which
Mm.
again, there's themes that come up in these interviews, which is really
Yeah, yeah.
interesting. There's very similar kind of narratives. So, do you think there was a missed opportunity when we brought in votes for 16 that actually we should have 100% brought in a compulsory educational element to that in schools, so that 16-year-olds go into the polls knowing what they were
Mm.
voting on? As simple as that. And the other question on the back of that is, do you think in terms of the confusion over who runs what, do you think that, without pointing fingers and saying names, certain campaigns focusing on issues that are not devolved, for example, is unhelpful to that and how we educate the public?
Yeah. So yeah, on vote of 16, definitely there's loads we could do on educating young people, and it's got to be non party political, isn't it? It's got to be about the structures and about citizenship and what it means, and be there's a whole generation that have now grown up with the Senedd in existence. A lot of them don't know what it does, and who the Welsh government are, and why it's important. So we need to have that education. Maybe it was a missed opportunity, but there's ways of doing it without making it compulsory. You can do a lot of work as a government, or local authorities can do a lot of work around that without having to go through a legislative route. You can put programs in place, but so what was your second question? What's the second part? Sorry.
So, just if you think it's unhelpful that certain
Oh
parties are
yeah,
focusing on aspects that are not devolved.
muddying the water a bit.
Obviously, yeah, obviously
Um,
immigration being the
yeah,
obvious one.
yeah. I think I think you can't disassociate all the levels of government at all. You just need to have it in context. So it's not helpful to run on something which is clearly not devolved, um, and to blame poor services for that and make it a sort of protest vote, because people are deciding which government is going to run Wales and the services in Wales for 4 years. I think where you can talk about the sort of wider context is about the money that comes from Westminster around um, what Wales needs from a UK government. I think that's perfectly legitimate, and Welsh Labour have done that in the past. When we had a Tory government that we disagreed with, but it's that clearly using like areas which the Welsh government are going to have no input on and no effect on, just to give a platform for future elections on the same topic, I think is more damaging to Welsh democracy. And I think the majority of the electorate actually get that, but there's obviously a section of the electorate that see this as an opportunity to protest, and there always will be a section that do that. It's just about getting out the doors, campaigning, just talking to people, talking to them around about what this election is actually about.
So, what would you say are the positives there? What is it that Labour have achieved in Wales that perhaps don't get spoken about? Because I do notice that sometimes it's hard to communicate the
Yeah.
positives that Labour have achieved in government here in Wales.
I think it's hard for people in Wales to see the difference sometimes that a Welsh government have done because they're not living elsewhere. They only see what they see. And so I think austerity, really it cut back on public services and people felt it here, just like anywhere else. But they probably don't realise the different decisions that were taken. So, there are times we put more money into local government to protect it. And that didn't happen in England. And you saw the difference in local government services being slashed. We had to make cuts here as well because we only had a certain amount of money from Westminster, but we made different decisions. We kept the school building program going, and I saw, so many schools in Carmarthenshire and elsewhere, sort of nearby in Wales that wouldn't have been built in England because that budget just got absolutely destroyed by cuts. I think we protected things like the EMA for young people. We tried again to put much money into health and social care as possible through local government, and there's some successes in that we managed to defend against austerity in those areas. But it was difficult. I'm not going to hide away from it. I think we there was a difficult period where we were making tough choices, but they were different, and we sought to protect those areas. And just off the top of my head, another one would be Flying Start, which I know like people in my community really benefited from. In England, that was just stopped. Sure Start was cut back completely by a Tory government. So that for families in poverty is huge here in Wales. Again, a success. So sometimes success is stopping something bad from happening, which we did in a lot of areas in Wales. And I wish we could be more ambitious. And I think we are looking now to the future to be way more ambitious with a new manifesto talking about investment and bringing in jobs. And I think you've seen, lately, Alina having a lot of success in private investment and getting Wales to be seen as somewhere to come and invest and somewhere that businesses can see as a stable, dependable government. So yeah, there's lots to be proud of. Acknowledging you've got to acknowledge people's frustration, that we would have wanted to do more, but there were constraints upon us at the time. And going forward now, we've got we've got a chance to be much more positive for Wales.
Just a side note, this is completely irrelevant, but I actually trained to be a teacher in Carmarthen schools. So
Oh,
I'm
did you?
doing the in Queen Elizabeth. I did my
Oh, right,
PhD.
okay, yeah. Again, that's another school that was built. That was a brand like a new school that was built under
Yeah,
the same that program, the 21st Century Schools. Yeah, brand new campus.
yeah. I
That
think
a
when I
lovely, lovely
started
campus.
my when I started my PhD, I think it was very new. I think it must have only been open for a couple of years when I started
Yeah,
my PhD.
yeah.
Yeah, it was brilliant. So would you say that, or what is your defence more specifically of the fact that there's an argument that Labour's been taken certain areas for granted? Obviously, I'm from the Rhondda. There's a coal tip right
Mm.
over my shoulder behind me. You probably can't see it. But what would be your defence of the fact that, a lot of people in this area do feel like Labour have taken their votes for granted?
I think, first of all, I'd say I think that's something which incumbent governments are having a problem with. I don't think it's something specific to like Welsh Labour. I think people feel they haven't seen change. They feel like their lot, has got worse, generally across Western democracies. So they're blaming the party that they've been maybe voting for a long time, that's been incumbent for a long time. And for us in Wales, that is us. That is Welsh Labour. It's been representing those communities. For quite a long time now. I don't think that, obviously I don't think that Welsh Labour are at fault in the big areas. Make a big impact on things like poverty in those areas, like the Rhondda or the valleys communities. That's driven by welfare changes, welfare cuts, the economy as a whole, which in the main is a UK government that's been, that was around for 14 years before we've only been in now for less than 2 years. And I think that's where the frustration people really feel is. That's where they're getting that from, is what I'd say. The Welsh government have had limited powers to be able to fight against that, to make change. But when you can point to things where they have, like the Heads of the Valleys Road, where the schools we mentioned that have been built, those are things which Welsh government did do and did defend. But as I said, most people don't differentiate between governments of different parties and powers in this context of multi-layered government. They see things getting worse, want change, act on it. I don't think you can blame them for that. I think it's time for us as an incumbent party to say, these are things we want to do. We couldn't do it because of these constraints. We really now are going to go forward with a positive mandate and invest more in your area. And this new system is really interesting in that every vote is equal. So I've been talking into people in rural areas in Carmarthenshire, and they're saying it's interesting that the Labour Party's campaigning here. Well, actually, every vote's equal in the system, so you don't want to concentrate on what traditionally your safe areas. You want to you want to go and campaign everywhere to get every vote because they're all equal. I think what it'll mean is there won't be areas that are so heavily weighted towards one part or the other in the future. You'll have to go and get all your votes from everywhere, and that'll apply to every party equally. And it'll cause some parties problems where they have a traditional base that might be more rural. They'll now be looking for city votes. So rural communities might feel that they're feeling taken for granted by certain parties. So it's going to be really interesting, I think, that all parties are now going to have to be broader in their appeal in Wales because they won't really be able to just focus on their particular areas of core support they've had under first past the post. So yeah, I think it's an opportunity to change for all parties, and I think it's not just fair to level the taking votes for granted on Welsh Labour as one party. I think political parties have that problem that in their core areas they're all seen to take the vote for granted. And this is an opportunity to, under PR, to be far more broad and inclusive of all the votes across Wales.
Yeah, that's really interesting because Sarah Evans was actually saying something similar to me, and she was saying that
Mm.
she's been a councillor in the Rhondda for I think it's 18 years off the top of my
Yeah,
head. And she said that this is obviously one of her concerns with this election was the scale of the constituency. And while
yeah,
she's Rhondda born and bred, having to go to Ogmore and areas like that was out of her
mm.
comfort zone. But she's actually enjoyed it because she was saying what she's noticed as well is how similar the issues are that people are seeing across the entire constituency. And that the
Yeah,
size doesn't matter so much as that reflection of the
yeah.
same
And
issues being repeated.
like Carmarthenshire, right, is you've got a very I wouldn't say urban, but more urban south, like Llanelli and Ammanford, and I'm from the Ammanford area. And then the north of the county is more rural and has issues around rural services and agriculture being the biggest part of the economy. And so I've had to do a lot of campaigning across a broad range of topics and across a big constituency geographically. But it's important that all those votes are treated equally within these new constituencies. And I would say, I'm a Carmarthenshire boy through and through, so my seat makes sense for me. Carmarthenshire as a defined seat is brilliant, but it is really varied. It's like a microcosm of Wales. So I've got to learn a lot from different communities that I want to represent. And like I said, it's meant that I've focused on some areas that maybe traditionally I wouldn't have if I was running for a more Labour traditional seat. So yeah, it's something I think is positive about the system, and you can learn a lot by engaging with communities that you haven't necessarily engaged with before.
Yeah, I was going to say to you, obviously Carmarthen being quite a diverse seat. I know Carmarthen well. I know
Mm.
all that area of Wales quite well. What would you say is or more to the point, what issues are you coming up against on the doorstep then, in terms of what are people saying to you in it, and maybe perhaps covering diversity of the area in that as well. So in
Yeah,
the rural areas and in the more urban areas. Obviously in
yeah.
Wales we're
So
using the word urban really
yeah,
interestingly as
yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah. I was saying, so I want to shy away from the word urban because it's more like just
Yeah.
towns, isn't it? They're more
Yeah, it is
like
towns, yeah.
mid-sized
More
towns.
built up
In
areas then.
post-industrial is what I'd say about Nestle and
Yeah.
Ammanford. And then you've got the more rural areas of Carmarthen up to Newcastle, Emlyn, and Llandovery, and those sort of areas, and West St Clair's, and Whitland. Those are areas that are still more rural and maybe have tourism vibes and businesses. So the thing that sort of unites everyone is this cost of living crisis. I think, and actually in more rural areas, you can feel it more because your services are far more spread out. You've got to drive everywhere. So things like petrol prices have a big impact. Whereas maybe in the towns, you might get away with a lot more walking and some better bus services and train links. So there's particularly in transport probably a more acute problem in the rural areas, and that's something I'm really passionate about solving, and I've been mentioning in local hustings and stuff, because I think that's a key to unlocking the economics and some of the demographic issues in rural Wales. Is that, if you're young, you're going to move away because you can't get anywhere and there are no jobs in the rural areas, and that shouldn't be the case. So I'm passionate about those issues, and I think that's something which unites the whole county. And then the lack of investment in public services in general, so particularly in health, where we've had, again, austerity and the buildings that need to have investment in. We've put that in our manifesto. We put that £4 billion forward for capital investment in buildings of hospitals. We know that's much needed in West Wales. We need that investment in our hospital facilities. And again, that affects the rural communities who have to travel quite far for their hospitals, but also then the more urban areas that there's a dense population around services which are struggling to keep up with the demand. Carmarthenshire is an ageing population, and so it needs a younger workforce. We need to retain those people to work in these services. We have a very good education system. We educate people in the Welsh language as well, in particular, and then people tend to go away to Cardiff or Swansea or even England to for work, and we need to attract those people back, to work in our public services. So that's the key challenges I see. And then generally the big one is, as I said, weirdly, people tend to bring up issues that are actually local government on the doorstep. They talk about investment in town centres. Again, that's local government. They talk about the need for new schools. That's local government with Welsh government funding. And the state of the roads, something things people use every day, tends to be local government. So we need to make sure that that's financed properly, and we need to make sure that local governments are spending it correctly, and that there's some accountability for that. So those are the issues I'm picking up across Carmarthenshire at the minute.
So obviously one thing with areas like Carmarthenshire and Pembrokeshire that come to mind is those small towns and communities,
Yeah.
those kind of really intricate areas. I actually went to one event, I can't remember the town, I'll have to find out, but in Carmarthen, when my uncle was manager of Wales, and we got invited to this dinner, and everyone on the table started speaking Welsh to me and my grandfather, and we were like, no, like, we're not from here, we don't speak Welsh. And how important do you think that is, with that in mind then, that you're from the area, that you are, like you said, you're Carmarthen, born and bred, and it seems as if that makes you proud, actually, that you're standing for that area.
Yeah. So I'm a Welsh speaker, and I've chosen to come back to Carmarthenshire to work. I went to university in London because I just wanted a bit of an adventure, and I wanted to go to the best university that I could for law. And I came back. I did my barrister training in Cardiff, and then I've come back to Carmarthenshire just because I love it. I've got family here and friends. Playing local sports teams, so I'm sort of ingrained in my community. And what I've just noticed that brain drain of younger people going for jobs, which I think is just disappointing, and we need to try and attract them back. We shouldn't ever put a limit on anyone's ambition, but we should make this place that as attractive, with as good an economy as possible, that people choose to stay here, choose to start businesses here, because there's the asset here is its culture, its heritage, its community. There's great community spirit across Carmarthenshire. People really feel strongly about where they're from. Different parts of it have different identities. The Llanelli versus Carmarthen dynamic is quite a strong one. Ammanford's got its own identity, and then the smaller towns, Buryport and Llandovery, are all, lovely towns to live in, with their different features of being close to the sea or in the countryside. There's real strength to Carmarthenshire and its community. And I think we really need to learn to harness that. There's a history, I think, of being quite negative sometimes around what can be done. But actually, there's an opportunity to have 3 levels of government that should really be working together. Local government, Senedd, and the UK government could really do a lot to invest in Carmarthenshire. And I think the next group of Senedd members for Carmarthenshire have an opportunity to make something happen. And I'm really passionate about doing that. I want to come away from however long I'm elected for, if I am, hopefully, with saying I've done something for Carmarthenshire as a backbencher at the beginning, as foremost, that I need to I want to do something to put Carmarthenshire on the map, get some investment and attention down here for different services, and be able to say that that's what I've done for my community, because that's primarily why you're elected, is to represent your constituency first and foremost.
So let's assume there's only like 2 questions left now. So it's it's a couple of days after the election, and you've won your seat. I was going to say keep your seat then, but you've won your seat.
Yeah.
What are your priorities as soon as you get in the Senate?
So the main one will obviously just be to see what is Carmarthenshire looking for out of the next government, whoever that government is. I want to see more transport investment down west. I want to see hospitals investment that I mentioned down west, which are in some, in our manifesto. I want to see more of that. So I'll be looking to see what Carmarthenshire gets out of the next programme for government, whoever is forming that government. And there's different ways of doing that depending on who's in the government, whether you do it sort of, using your internal party mechanisms or whether you do it by providing some opposition pressure. But that'll be my focus. And there's on policy side, I've said I've worked in health policy for a while, so I've got some areas I'm passionate about, which again, from the backbenches, I'd be wanting to raise. So palliative care is something that's important to me. Having had some family experience, I want people to have consistent and quality palliative care. End of life is really important, and it's sometimes not given the priority it should. There's variation across Wales amongst health boards, but there's an opportunity again for some work to be done in the Senedd cross-party to really bring that forward and to make some improvements for people's lives. So that'll be one area I want to focus on. And as I said, I'm passionate about a couple of other issues. So, Welsh language, and I'm a reservist, a Royal Navy reservist. So I'm passionate about veterans' health and representing the armed forces community. So what can we do in Wales to make services better for people who've served? So those are the sort of areas I'll be looking at to get more involved in pretty much straight away.
And so final question then, why should people vote Labour, and specifically why should Carmarthen vote for Calum Higgins?
So that broad message, for Welsh Labour is we know that it's been a challenging couple of decades from external factors that weren't created by Welsh Labour, and we have to acknowledge that where we are is that things need to change. We want to be that party that harnesses that. So that next chapter of devolution is about investment, it's about being positive. We set out in our manifesto our key pledges that we really want to drive Wales forward. So I would say, vote for Welsh Labour if you want a government that has the experience, but also acknowledges that there's a positive future to be had and things will get better. And for Carmarthenshire, there's change. It changes an interesting question in Carmarthenshire because you've got, a Plaid Cymru Council that have been in charge for over a decade. There's as much of the establishment as anyone else is around here. And so if you're going to vote for change, you need to vote for younger, more, enthusiastic candidates who want to represent the area, who want to say, let's put Carmarthenshire on the map and get that investment for us. And I think I'm that person to do that. And we have a great slate of candidates for Labour in Carmarthenshire who all represent areas of Carmarthenshire and their community. There's real diversity in work experience, in where they're from in the county. And we all want to represent Carmarthenshire to the best we can. So what I'd say is if you vote for Carmarthenshire Labour, you'll get a local team who are really committed to making sure that Carmarthenshire's heard and that we get our fair share of, this next chapter of investment and whatever happens next in devolution in Wales. There's an opportunity here for a Labour voice in Carmarthenshire to be a strong one, and one that represents its communities at the Senedd effectively over the next 4 years.
You have been listening to Wales in Context. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow the podcast and share it with someone interested in the future of Wales. All notes and resources from today's episode can be found in the show notes. You could also follow Wales in Context on TikTok, and if you'd like to support the podcast, please consider leaving a comment or a review. Thank you for listening. Diolch.